Being fully aware and vigilant, Bodhisattva appeared in the Tusita heaven. He stayed there as long as his lifespan allowed, until the time for his self-perfection in the human realm came. Bodhisattvas who live in Tusita heaven have perfected Dasa Kusala Karma, or the 10 mental perfections, will be reincarnated for the last time in the human realm and attain enlightenment to become Buddha. The 10 mental perfections are generosity or dana, morality or sila, withdrawal or nekama, understanding or panya, enthusiastic energy or virya, patient forbearance or kanti, honest truthfulness or sacha, resolute determination or aditana, kind friendliness or metta, and imperturbable equanimity or upekkha.
The Bodhisattva revealed to the gods in all the universes that his last rebirth would occur soon.
The gods from the realms of heaven roamed Jambudvipa. They disguised themselves as ascetics. They announced that an exceptional man will be born, and he would have 32 signs of greatness. A human who possesses all these signs would have two possible future life paths. Firstly, he would become a universal monarch, a conqueror of the world who has 7 types of precious riches, such as the precious Dharma, the precious elephants, the precious horses, the precious jewels, the precious wife, as well as the faithful stewards and the ministers. Secondly, if he were to renounce the household and become ascetic, this bodhisattva would become Buddha. Relinquishing all of his desires without depending on anyone as his teacher, the bodhisattva would become a teacher for the gods and humans.
The Bodhisattva examined the 4 criteria to descend into the world, which included his time of birth, the continent, country, and in which family he would be born.
The bodhisattva delivered his last Dharma sermon before descending to Jambudvipa. The bodhisattva sat on a shimmering throne, resulting from his past life wholesome deeds. The gods came countlessly in numbers from 10 wind directions. They all prostrated in the bodhisattva's direction.
The Bodhisattva preached the Dharma for the last time before descending to Jambudvipa. The gods rejoiced after hearing the preaching of the Dharma. The gods from the multiple realm of heaven gathered under the Bodhisattva's feet and said, "Should the Exalted One leave us, then this realm of heaven will lose their holiness and greatness." The Bodhisattva then replied, "Bodhisattva Maitreya will continue teaching the Dharma. Bodhisattva Maitreya will attain enlightenment and become a Buddha after me."
According to the norms of the previous Buddhas, the bodhisattva would choose the best figure to enter his mother's womb, in this instance, as a white elephant. All the Brahmana in the castle would then predict this event as an advent of a noble human with 32 signs of greatness.
The kingdom of Kapilavatthu was led by King Suddhodana, located approximately 100 miles northeast from Benares. King Suddhodana and Queen Mahamaya had been living contentedly for 7 years with no successes. The queen did not realize her immense significance of being the mother of the Bodhisattva.
The gods descended from the heavens to pay their respect to Queen Mahamaya, who would become a mother of the Bodhisattva.
The gods countlessly in number gathered to decide on who will be present and guard the Bodhisattva during his descent to Jambudvipa, who will be present during his birth, childhood, and adolescence, who will be present and serve him as he proceeded to the seat of awakening, and also who will be present when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, until he demonstrated his passing into Mahaparinibbana.
Being fully aware and clear understanding, the Bodhisattva passed away in the Tusita heaven to be reincarnated in the human realm, then entering his mother's womb.
As the Bodhisattva passed away in the Tusita heaven and descended into his mother's womb, an intense glow of light penetrated all realms, powerful enough to radiate through the lower realms and the crevices of the void realm, where darkness fills the realms and the rays of the sun, however intense and potent, will be unable to pierce through the realm.
Queen Mahamaya observed the Uposatha fasting as a part of an annual festival in the Asalha month. The queen requested the guidance from a moral teacher for 8 precepts to be observed throughout the day. While the full moon was shining brightly, she dreamt of a white elephant with its glowing trunk, carrying a stalk of a lotus flower with it. The elephant walked 3 times clockwise, circling the queen, and entered her womb from her right side.
After the Bodhisattva had entered his mother's womb, 4 young gods came to guard him in 4 directions so that neither humans nor non-humans would be able to harm the Bodhisattva and his mother.
Queen Mahamaya was ecstatic when she woke up. After putting on her jewelry and flowers to beautify herself, she went to the Asoka forest along with her escorts. The queen sent a message to King Suddhodana to visit her.
King Suddhodana received this message, felt a tremendous joy, and at once headed for the Asoka forest.
Queen Mahamaya immediately told her dream and made a request that the king summon the Brahmanas to decipher the meaning of the dream.
The Brahmanas came and Queen Mahamaya told her dream to them. The Brahmanas then foretold, the Sakya people will not feel sorrow, instead they will have great happiness. A son will be born and his body parts will be adorned with signs of greatness. He will belong to the lineage of kings, a great universal monarch. However, if he abandons pleasures, the kingdom and his castles, and becomes an ascetic, then he will spread love and compassion to the world. He will be the one who attains enlightenment, the Buddha.
King Suddhodana was satisfied with the Brahmana's analysis and felt joyful. He offered a wonderful meal for the Brahmanas and some gifts when they were about to leave. King Suddhodana gave donations to all his people, distributed through the 4 gates of the Kapilavatthu kingdom. The king donated food for the famished, drinks for the thirsty, clothes, mattresses, carriages to those who required transportation, and other forms of donations that the people needed.
The king conferred with the nobleman about building a new castle for Queen Mahamaya, then thought, where can the queen live? Not only comfortably but happily as well.
At once, several kings volunteered to build palaces to house Queen Mahamaya. Being impartial, and by the power of the Bodhisattva, Queen Mahamaya appeared in all of those palaces.
While conceiving, Queen Mahamaya naturally became wiser, absent from harming living beings, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. Happiness filled the kingdom of Kapilavatthu, and the youth of the Sakya tribe became generous and charitable to those in need.
The gods managed the rain to come and the wind to blow at the right time. The seasons and the constellations all moved in a balanced manner. The city of Kapilavatthu, the Sakya people who lived there, were all fulfilled of their needs for food and drinks due to bountiful harvest. All the people there felt blissful and were generous.
King Suddhodana frequently visited the ascetics and practiced the Dharma.
The Bodhisattva was conceived by Queen Mahamaya for 10 months, and it was time for him to be born into the world. All flowers blossomed, and the trees were filled with ripe fruits. The lion cubs descended from the mountains, happily roaming in city of Kapilavatthu. and sat in front of the town gates without hurting anyone. The calves of the white elephants also entered the city and stroked King Suddhodana with their trunks. The abode of King Suddhodana, the castle, monastery, fences and roads all glimmered as if they were adorned with jewels.
Queen Mahamaya, with the power which she obtained from the Bodhisattva, knew that it was time for her to deliver the baby. As per custom of the Indian women during that time, the women would return to their parents' home for the delivery. The queen met King Suddhodana and asked for his approval to visit her parents' home in Devadaha.
King Suddhodana prepared horses, elephants, and a royal carriage. The king also commanded his men to clean and beautify the path that the queen would take.
On the way to Devadaha from Kapilavatthu, the entourage arrived at the Lumbini garden, in the forest of the Sala trees, and stopped to rest. That day was a full moon in the Vesakha month in the year 623 before Christ. The queen alighted from the carriage, accompanied by her maidens. When she was wandering among the trees with large flowers, she saw a huge and beautiful Sala tree. The branches of the tree spread out and had large flowers growing onto them. Queen Mahamaya immediately sensed the urge to deliver her baby. The maiden then draped the area with curtain. The power of Bodhisattva made the branch of the tree bend down and paid its respect to the Queen Mahamaya. The queen then reached out to the branch. In a standing position, the Bodhisattva was born from the right side of his mother. 4 young gods greeted him and placed him in front of Queen Mahamaya while uttering, "Rejoice, the queen who gave birth to a son with a divine power." There were no single stain which stuck to his body during birth, like a gem placed on a very silky and smooth cloth, making the gem and the cloth unable to defile each other because of their purity. 2 streams of water fell from the sky, one warm and the other one cold, to rinse both the Bodhisattva's and his mother's bodies. Immediately after his birth, the Bodhisattva stepped onto the ground firmly. Afterwards, he trod 7 steps to the north, and with each step he took, a large lotus flower appeared as a cushion for his feet. Bodhisattva stood among lotus flowers and nobly gazed into 4 directions. With knowledge earned from his past life's mental perfections, Bodhisattva went through 3 realms and did not find anyone like him in terms of their righteousness and knowledge. He then lifted his right hand above his head and said, "I am the oldest, I am the most noble in this world. This is my last birth. There will never again be a new existence."
Upon the 5th day of the prince's birth, King Suddhodana held a name-giving ceremony. He invited hundreds of well-educated Brahmanas to interpret the signs of greatness on the prince's body and his future. The Brahmanas predicted that there will be 2 possible outcomes of the prince's future. If he were to live in the castle, then he would be the king of the world. However, if the prince witnessed an old man, a sick man, a diseased man, and an ascetic, the prince would abandon the worldly life and become a Buddha. Only one Brahmana, by the name of Kondanya, staunchly emphasized that the prince must become a Buddha. King Suddhodana felt that the purpose of his life has been fulfilled because of the prince's birth, and thereafter named his son Siddhartha, which means one who has accomplished a goal. His family name is Gautama. He is then called Siddhartha Gautama.
7 days after the Bodhisattva's birth, Queen Mahamaya passed away and reincarnated into the Tusita heaven. Her demise was not due to her flawed physique, but due to the end of her lifespan.
a great ascetic by the name of Asita Kaladevala, who inhabited the slopes of the Himalayan mountain, possessed incredible abilities. At the time of the Bodhisattva's birth, he noticed the amazing signs that nature has shown and realized that an exalted human being was born in the kingdom of the Sakya clan in the city of Kapilavatthu. Afterwards, Asita descended from the mountain, together with his nephew, Nalaka, to King Suddhodana's palace and asked for his permission to see the prince. After scrutinizing the prince's body, Asita recognized the 32 excellent signs on the prince's body. Through his wisdom, Asita knew how certain it is for the prince to become a Buddha. Acknowledging this fact, Asita laughed heartily, but suddenly sobbed. He said, "Dear great king, I am laughing because I consider myself to be very lucky meeting him, one who will become a Buddha, the enlightened. But I am crying for myself, as I know I am very old now, and I possibly will not be able to follow his teachings, which is a great loss to me."
The elders and the wise discussed who should be the appropriate guardian to take care of Prince Siddhartha. They finally agreed on Mahaprajapati Gotami, Queen Mahamaya's younger sister, to do so.
One day, the elders of the Sakya clan gathered and told King Suddhodana, "King Suddhodana, it is time for the prince to pay a visit to the temple for the worshipping procession." King Suddhodana agreed and informed Mahaprajapati Gotami, "The prince will be going to the temple to worship. Please dress the prince lavishly." The prince then asked Mahaprajapati Gotami, "Mother, where will I be taken to?" To which Mahaprajapati Gotami replied, "My dear child, I will take you to the temple." The prince said, "Which god will we worship today? Which god is such a noble?"
The king ordered that the city to be richly ornamented, all the main street, crossroads, and markets to be beautifully decorated. The disabled, the blind, the deaf, the mute, the lame, the sick, and the old were all removed from the road that the prince would take to reach the temple. The carriage was full of pretty ladies and the sound of wonderful instrumental music, accompanying the prince throughout his journey to the temple.
During the journey to the temple, thousands of guards came from every direction to guard the prince. As the prince arrived at the temple's gate, and at the moment he stepped foot on the temple's ground, guards came and paid their respects to the prince.
The chief advisor of the palace met King Suddhodana and reminded him that it was the right time to prepare adornments and jewelry for the prince. They toiled for 7 days and 7 nights to prepare beautiful ornaments for the prince. However, soon after the ornaments were placed on the Bodhisattva's body, rays of light from the prince's body outshone the ornaments. The ornaments lost their luster and could not glisten anymore, just like lumps of coal that are placed next to gold.
It was time for the prince to attend school, and the gods, Nagas, Yaksa, Gandharvas came down to protect the prince's journey. The youths of the Sakya clan accompanied the prince along his journey and cleaned the path that the prince took to reach the school. As the prince arrived at the school, the headmaster was mesmerized by the splendor and radiance emanating from the prince's body. He then immediately prostrated to the prince.
Every single aspect of knowledge was soon mastered by the prince, including mathematics, science, astrology, and craftsmanship. The prince was prodigious as he had mastered these skills in his past lives.
At 7 years old, the prince, along with an entourage from the palace, visited a village to witness the farmers plowing the field.
After going around the village, Prince Siddhartha walked alone toward a rose apple tree at the edge of a field. The prince then started to focus his mind. He entered the first stage of deep meditation, freed from defilement and with equanimity in his mental state and being fully aware. The prince reached the first jhana. King Suddhodana realized that the prince was not with them and asked, "Where did the prince go? I do not see him." At once all the advisors and maidens ran around looking for the prince. One of the ministers saw the prince sitting with his legs crossed, concentrating deeply and ignoring the crowd around him. The shadow cast by a rose apple tree remained stationary as it shaded the prince who meditated throughout the noon. King Suddhodana then prostrated in front of the prince.
When the prince reached adulthood, King Suddhodana held a meeting with the officials of the Sakya clan, discussing ascetic Asita's prophecy that if the prince were to renounce the household, he would become a Buddha. But if he were to stay, he would become a universal monarch with no interruption to the line of his throne. To discourage the prince from leaving the worldly life, it was suggested to get the prince married, in hopes that the prince would abandon his desires to leave the castle. King Suddhodana asked his ministers how to find a suitable girl for the prince to marry.
The ministers searched the whole city of Kapilavatthu to find the one suitable to be Prince Siddhartha's wife. At last, a woman of the Sakya's clan by the name of Yasodhara, the daughter of King Supabuddha, was deemed suitable.
King Suddhodana sent the advisory council to meet King Supabuddha to propose to Princess Yasodhara on the prince's behalf. But King Supabuddha rejected the idea and doubted the prince's abilities. King Suddhodana then announced that there will be a competition for all teen males of the Sakya clan. The winner would get to marry Princess Yasodhara. The match would test the participants in terms of their proficiency in swordsmanship, archery, combat, wrestling, art, and mathematics.
On the day of the competition, Devadatta, the prince's cousin, came to the city of Kapilavatthu and saw a white elephant the prince ride. Intoxicated by tremendous jealousy, Devadatta grabbed the elephant's trunk with his left hand and killed it in a single stroke.
Prince Siddhartha arrived at the gate of Kapilavatthu and saw the dead elephant. He then asked the crowd who killed it. Nearby witnesses then said it was Devadatta. Fearing that the carcass would infect the residents of the city with diseases, the prince gently lifted and threw the carcass, and it flew a mile away outside the city.
As many as 500 Sakya's male youths exhibited their skills in script writing and mathematics, but no one could defeat Prince Siddhartha.
The prince then announced a mathematical unit that would enable the calculation of the size of Mount Meru, the amount of sand in the Ganga River, and the size of the smallest particle, which was 7 sizes smaller than the size of water and dust particles.
Prince Siddhartha surpassed every single male of the Sakya tribe in not only physical prowess, but also in the intellectuality. Further, he was well versed in recognizing all kinds of plants and herbs in the world, and he was also capable of counting the amount of dust particles as well as the amount of water droplets which form the universe.
During the archery match, the prince surpassed all of the Sakya youth by using his grandfather's set of bow and arrow, Sihahamu. When the arrow was released from the bow, the shrill of the wind was heard in all nooks and corners in the city of Kapilavatthu, and the target board was split in half with the arrow piercing the 7 palm trees behind. Thereafter, the arrow entered the ground and finally disappeared.
As the winner of all the matches, Prince Siddhartha was allowed to request for Yasodhara's hand in marriage. Unlike the other women of the Sakyas clan, Princess Yasodhara refused to wear a veil to cover her face. On the wedding day, Yasodhara was criticized but retorted by saying that a noble being would shine in her own radiance, no matter what she wore, even though her clothes are made of kusa grass.
The princess and Yasodhara's life in the palace was full of unimaginable supreme pleasures, a life that was comfortable and heaven-like content.
King Suddhodana surrounded his prince with worldly pleasures and luxury. He commanded his men to construct high walls surrounding the castle, and of beautiful gardens to ensure that the prince did not witness any of 4 sightings prophesied. Furthermore, the king appointed beautiful ladies to play music and songs in order to entertain the prince. However, all of the luxury and entertainment were unable to please the prince anymore. Soon he felt saturated and the palace felt like a prison.
The gods came down to visit the prince and remind him of his noble purpose of being reborn into the human realm.
One night, King Suddhodana dreamed that Prince Siddhartha left the palace, exhorted by the gods and dressed like an ascetic. Anxious that the dream would come true, King Suddhodana pampered the prince with even greater worldly pleasures. King Suddhodana commanded the constructions of 3 palaces, namely the Summer Palace, the Rainy Season Palace, and the Winter Palace.
Guards were stationed at every corner of the palaces so that the prince was under tight surveillance, especially at the eastern gate of the palace, as it had been foretold that the prince would leave the palace from that gate. Every day, the prince was surrounded by ravishing ladies, but he did not enjoy it, as his life contained more worldly idleness.
One day, the prince expressed his desire to stroll in the garden outside of the palace and asked his charioteer to forward his message to King Suddhodana. The King Suddhodana granted the wish and gave the orders to clean and adorn the town that the prince would visit. Along the path that the prince took, there were no elderly nor the sick present, only those who were pleasing in appearance. When the carriage on which the prince rode went past the castle's gate, a god disguised himself as a limping old man at the side of the street. He was old, frail, emaciated, and had wrinkled skin. The prince asked Channa, his charioteer, "Who is that man? He looks frail, wrinkled, and walks with the aid of a walking stick." Channa replied, "Your Highness, the man is overcome by old age. He is weak because his strength has been consumed by age." The prince then asked again, "Does this phenomenon occur only to his family or does it happen to everyone?" Channa answered, "Your Highness, it will happen to everyone, every caste, even your father, mother, and your siblings. They cannot escape from old age." The prince was shocked and became dejected upon hearing those words, and then he concluded that turning old is inevitable.
On the second encounter, the entourage continued their journey to the southern gate of the town. There, another god transformed himself into a sick man who was severely in pain at the side of the road. The man was breathing heavily and lying down on top of his own feces. The prince continued asking, "Channa, this poor man's body is enshrouded with diseases. He is panting, he is emaciated, and his belly keeps on expanding and contracting as if he has difficulty in breathing. Shana then answered, "Your Highness, this man is suffering from a severe ailment. He is on the brink of death." The prince then concluded that being sick is a form of pain and every human has to undergo sickness.
On the third encounter, the prince's royal carriage went onto the western city gate. The gods all collectively transformed into a large parade of people carrying a stretcher. On top of the stretcher was a deceased man, and surrounding him were his relatives and friends who wailed while sending him off. The prince asked Chana, "Who is the man carried on the stretcher? Why do people mourn for him?" Chana explained, "Your Highness, the man carried on the stretcher has passed away. He cannot meet his wife, children, relatives, and friends anymore." The prince was stunned and realized how sad it is to have the youth replaced by old age. How sad it is that the health is taken away by diseases. How sad it is that a man's life is not long. How sad it is that there are people who will attach to worldly things without realizing that old age, disease, and death will soon affect them.
On the fourth encounter, the carriage proceeded to the northern town gate. The god turned himself into an ascetic who happened to pass by that path that the prince took. The ascetic walked elegantly and mindfully. The way he looked forward, to the left, and to the right was so graceful. The way he wore his robe and held his donation bowl was unpretentious. The prince inquired Chana, "Who is that man?" He looked calm and peaceful. Shana responded, "He is an ascetic. He has renounced the household. He is looking for peacefulness, free from attachment and anger, and he lives from alms that are offered by sincere families."
One night, Princess Yasodhara had a terrible dream, which she inquired the prince. She was confident that her dream was not a nightmare. On the other hand, it would bring happiness to mankind.
One night, Prince Siddhartha was trying to find a suitable time to ask for his father's consent to leave the palace. King Suddhodana tried to discourage the prince by offering all the worldly pleasures and even his own throne as a king. However, the prince refused it. The king then asked what gift could discourage the prince. Prince Siddhartha requested for the gift that could prevent people from old age, diseases, and death. King Suddhodana was powerless to grant the prince's wish, and with a heavy heart, he let the prince leave the palace.
The news that Prince Siddhartha would be leaving the palace was announced to everyone in the kingdom of the Sakya clan. Hundreds of the best men were prepared to stall the prince, and Queen Mahaprajapati Gautami commanded the stewards of the palace to reinforce the security in the castle. Dances and songs to be played continuously so that everyone stayed awake day and night. All stewards were armed to protect their dear prince so that he would not leave the palace without any guards. If the prince did abandon the palace, then the kingdom would lose its heir and be a place without happiness.
In the middle of the beautiful dances and songs, the prince sat asleep on the throne, and the gods also made the dancers fall asleep. The prince then woke up and noticed that all the dancers were asleep in postures that were unpleasing to the eye. Their clothes were crumpled and messy. The jewelries that they had worn fell and were cluttered all over the floor. Some of them were snoring, gritting their teeth, talking in their sleep unconsciously, and their faces, which were attractive initially, became unappealing. Witnessing such scene, the prince pondered how vulnerable the human body is, just like how his own body was made up of organs subjected to old age, diseases, and death.
Convinced, the prince got up and went to the eastern gate of the palace to call his charioteer. "Chana, ordering him to prepare the horse Kantaka. When the prince would leave the palace, Channa tried to change the prince's mind. Still, without any hesitation, Prince Siddhartha declared that it was time for him to strive in order to liberate the human beings from the circle of dukkha, meaning suffering. Upon midnight, the gods made all residents of Kapilavatthu fast asleep.
Prince Siddhartha left the palace by riding on the horse Kantaka, accompanied by his charioteer, Channa. The gods descended from the heaven to aid the prince's departure. All the citizens of Kapilavatthu were asleep. The eastern gate of the city was open, and the path that the prince would take was glowing. Along the way, the gods paid homage to the prince with banners and flags, and the Naga king poured a rain of flowers as a form of reverence. The Yaksas lifted Kantaka, the prince's horse, with their hands. Kantaka had souls of lotus flowers that his galloping did not produce any sound at all.
Prince Siddhartha's journey passed the abodes of the Sakya clan, Kaudya clan, and the Mala clan. Reaching a forest, Prince Siddhartha dismounted himself and gave the orders to Channa and Kantaka to return to the palace.
By the river bank of the Enoma River, at the age of 29, Prince Siddhartha, the sole heir of the Sakya kingdom, young, handsome, and full of vigor, finally relinquished all worldly pleasures to become an ascetic. Prince Siddhartha released all ornaments from his body and gave them all to Channa. Then, the prince cut off his hair with his sword as a symbol of his relinquishment from the worldly life. When the bundle of the hair was cast into the air, the gods caught and collected it as a form of respect in the heaven.
A god disguised himself as a hunter, wearing a saffron-colored robe. Prince Siddhartha then asked the hunter to exchange his royal silken garment for the saffron robe. The gods then received the silken garment with both hands as a devotion to the Bodhisattva.
The news that Prince Siddhartha left the palace and became an ascetic reverberated in the realm of the gods, with all gods in the realms felt tremendous happiness because Prince Siddhartha would be a Buddha who would start the revolution of the Dharma wheel for all human beings and the gods. During his hermitage, Prince Siddhartha was well known as ascetic Gautama.
On his way to Vaisali, ascetic Gautama walked past a hermitage belonging to women who were Brahmins. The Brahmins donated food to him.
Ascetic Gautama visited a renowned ascetic called Alara Kalama, a teacher for hundreds of his followers to learn spiritual practice. Alara Kalama accepted him as his student.
Not long after learning from his teacher, Alara Kalama, ascetic Gautama has mastered all the knowledge imparted, even acquiring the same level of proficiency as his teacher. However, ascetic Gautama was not satisfied, as his teacher's teachings did not liberate the suffering of living beings. Thus, ascetic Gautama decided to go a separate way from his teacher and continued the search for the cure on his own, the cure for all living beings.
Ascetic Gautama stayed for a while in Vaisali, then proceeded the journey to Rajagaha, the capital of Magadha. Ascetic Gautama resided on the slopes of the great Pandava mountain, with thousands of gods ascending from the heaven to protect him. When morning came, ascetic Gautama went to Rajagaha to receive alms. The news of this ascetic's arrival was heard by King Bimbisara, and the king immediately went to the foothill of the Pandava mountain to present alms personally to ascetic Gautama.
King Bimbisara revered ascetic Gautama with all his heart and hoped that the Bodhisattva would stay. King Bimbisara also offered half of his kingdom to him. Ascetic Gautama explained that he himself was a prince of the Sakya kingdom, but has relinquished all worldly pleasures and all worldly beauty to seek the perfect enlightenment. King Bimbisari pleaded that should ascetic Gautama manage to attain the perfect enlightenment, he would come back to Rajagaha to teach the Dharma.
A famous ascetic by the name of Udakaramaputa, who had many followers, arrived in Rajagaha. Ascetic Gautama then met him and requested for his tutelage. Udakaramaputa was renowned for his teaching, in which the way of equilibrium, which is neither perception nor non-perception. It was not hard for ascetic Gautama to gain the knowledge and surpass his teacher in terms of proficiency. However, ascetic Gautama was not satisfied because he had not attained a peace of mind and he had not been able to stop dukkha. Ascetic Gautama then left Udakaramaputa, followed by 5 other ascetics who felt the same way. They had not achieved peace of mind under Udakaramaputta's tutelage.
Ascetic Gautama and the 5 ascetics left Magadhamma and arrived in the Gaya mountain, practicing austerities. Ascetic Gautama now realized that there were 3 ways of austerities, and he analogized them as the following. First, suppose there is a piece of damp and sticky piece of wood submerged in the water, and a man has brought some fire twigs to light it by rubbing them against each other. He will not succeed. This is the analogy of an ascetic who has not been able to detach his body from the sensory pleasures. Despite his austere efforts, he will not attain enlightenment. Second, suppose there is a piece of damp and sticky piece of wood lying on a dry land. A man has brought some fire twigs to light it by rubbing them against each other. He will not succeed. This is the analogy of an ascetic who has been able to detach his body from the sensory pleasures but not his mind and heart. Despite his austere efforts, he will not attain enlightenment. Third, suppose there is a piece of dry wood lying on a dry land. A man has brought some fire twigs to light it by rubbing them against each other. He will succeed. This is the analogy of an ascetic who has been able to detach his body from the sensory pleasures and also his mind and heart. Due to his efforts, he will then achieve the great enlightenment.
Ascetic Gautama and the 5 hermits wandered progressively through Magadha until they arrived in Senanigama near Uruvela. There was a tranquil and a strategic piece of land there, with a beautiful forest, a river with clear water flowing, and a nearby village to collect alms. Ascetic Gautama thought that this would be an auspicious place to practice austerities. Ascetic Gautama, along with the 5 hermits, practiced self-mortification, with him sitting motionless and having minimal level of daily food consumption, in which he consumed a spoonful of bean soup occasionally. His body reached an extreme stage of emaciation. Ascetic Gautama also did not shield himself from the exposure of rain and heat, wild beasts, and most of all, he also held his breath at times.
The gods in the Tusita heaven announced the news of ascetic Gautama's progress to his mother, Mahamaya. Immediately, she rushed to the Uruvela forest accompanied by the other gods to the banks of the Niranjara river. It pierced her heart to see how emaciated and dying ascetic Gautama was. Mahamaya then tried to make ascetic Gautama realize that if he were to continue living in this self-mortification, he would die before ever attaining enlightenment.
For 6 years, ascetic Gautama had undergone this extreme austerity. His body was reduced to merely skeleton, and if he were to pat on his belly, he would have felt his backbones. His face and body became blackish. His eyeballs seemed like stars in a deep well. He had a hunchback, and would collapse whenever he tried to get up. The gods who were witnessing his self-torture became worried that ascetic Gautama would pass away. They approached him and offered essences of heavenly food for him to absorb, but were met with ascetic Gautama's refusal.
Ascetic Gautama thought every single hermit in the past have surely undergone a sensation of pain, torture, and being pierced, as there is no greater pain than this austerity. However, with this practice of this self-mortification, I have not achieved the knowledge deserved by the holy people. Could there be another way to enlightenment? Ascetic Gautama suddenly recalled his deep state meditation when he was young under the rose apple tree. He was contented to have attained a deep state meditation back then, realizing that it should be the path to attain the great enlightenment. With that, a thought was spurred on him. This is the true path to the great enlightenment. Ascetic Gautama then compared his previously lavish life in the palace to his current tortured and sickly condition, and then realized that these two extreme ways would not lead him to the state of enlightenment. Ascetic Gautama then decided to tread on the middle path from the two extremes by starting to consume solid food. His 5 fellow ascetics thought that ascetic Gautama gave up and was no longer consistent in striving for enlightenment, and so they left him alone.
After deciding to leave extreme austerity, ascetic Gautama considered it a routine to receive alms from the villages. He gradually regained his strength, and his face became radiant again.
The robe that he had worn for 6 years was tattered, and he apparently saw a piece of dusty used cloth by covering corpses in the graveyard. Because it was dusty, ascetic Gautama intended to wash it in a nearby pool. The evil Mara wanted to inflict harm on him by causing an instant flood from the pool. By the edge of the pool, a tree goddess saved him by elongating the branches of the Kabuba tree for ascetic Gautama to grab onto.
The gods were moved by the news about ascetic Gautama, who was going to change his robe with a cloth previously used to cover corpses. A god came down to earth and went to ascetic Gautama to hand him a saffron robe, which was more worthy for an exalted ascetic to wear.
Sujata, daughter of the village chief in Uruvela, fully supported ascetic Gautama's drive to attain enlightenment by preparing him nutritious meals, including porridge specially cooked with a mixture of milk and honey, and this dish was served in a golden bowl. Sujata sent her servants to invite ascetic Gautama to receive alms at the abode of the village chief, to which he accepted the offer. Ascetic Gautama also received the golden bowl.
While carrying the bowl filled with the milk porridge, ascetic Gautama left Uruvela for the Naranjara river to clean himself. Thousands of gods and heavenly beings came to revere and prostrate to him.
The gods and the heavenly beings poured aloe vera and sandalwood powders, fragrances, and heavenly flowers into the river. So at that time, the whole river was full of flowers as well as fragrances. They then stored the water that ascetic Gautama used and preserved it in the heaven to honor him.
Ascetic Gautama came out of the river and searched for a place to shade himself by the banks of the river. A Naga girl, who lived nearby the river, emerged from the earth and offered a diamond-adorned throne for ascetic Gautama to rest.
Ascetic Gautama finished the milk porridge which Sujata offered and was grateful to her for her dish that had revitalized his body.
Afterwards, ascetic Gautama brought the golden bowl back to the Naranjara river and determinedly uttered, "If by today I would be successful in becoming a Buddha, then this bowl shall flow upstream, but if not, then this bowl will flow downstream." Ascetic Gautama then placed the bowl on the Naranjara river. Magically, the golden bowl cut the flow of the river, floated, and moved upstream until it was finally sucked by a whirlpool and fell onto the abode of Kala, or the Naga king.
Ascetic Gautama proceeded to the Gaya forest escorted by the gods looking for a suitable place for meditation. The shady Bodhi tree was chosen as the most suitable place to attain perfect enlightenment. A momo of the name Sotia came, carrying a bundle of grasses from the opposite direction of Ascetic Gautama. He saw Ascetic Gautama and was amazed by his appearance. Sotia then presented 8 bundles of kusa grass as a sitting cushion.
The gods and the Brahmas came from 10,000 solar systems, along with Brahma Sampati and Naga king, Mahakala, who came with thousands of female Naga dancers. Full of delight and anticipation, they arrived to witness the moment when ascetic Gautama would attain the state of Buddha by the means of a deep state meditation of enlightenment.
The gods and the Brahmas were patiently surrounding the Bodhi tree, waiting to witness this rare occasion with their own eyes, when the ascetic Gautama Bodhisattva will achieve the perfect enlightenment.
Ascetic Gautama, sitting with his legs crossed, facing east under the Bodhi tree, full of determination, declared his determined will. Let my whole body, flesh and my blood, dry and wrinkle. I will not rise from my seat unless I have attained the state of Buddha.
Mara, the ruler of the Desire Realm, had been observing ascetic Gautama for the past 6 years of his asceticism, waiting for him to hold ill thoughts such as evil intentions, worldly desire, and malice. But he had none as he was able to overcome them properly. In order to hinder ascetic Gautama from attaining full enlightenment, Mara and his army turned themselves into horrifying figures and fled war banners. Mara rode on the aggressive elephant Kirik Makala and launched an assault on ascetic Gautama with a battle cry that could be heard as far as 1,000 yohana. The gods who previously assembled under the Bodhi tree all vanished. Mara then created violent and stormy cyclones, and he rained down stones, spheres, swords, and arrows continuously. But they were all futile as ascetic Gautama remained concentrating on his meditation. All of those munitions directed to him fell, turning into a shower of heavenly flowers around his feet.
Mara used another way to hinder ascetic Gautama from attaining the state of Buddha by sending his beauteous daughters, Rati, meaning attachment, Arati, meaning hatred, and Tanha, meaning desire, to seduce him. They tried every way to gain his attention. However, like a towering mountain, ascetic Gautama did not flinch, and with his pure and concentrated mind, he had defeated Mara.
On the full moon night in the month of Azaka in 588 before Christ, ascetic Gautama looked very graceful while sitting with his legs crossed at the foot of the Bodhi tree. He then attained the 4 states of meditation, jhana, and with such a pure and well-concentrated mind, easy to control and not easily flinch, he succeeded achieving the 3 true knowledges. The first knowledge was that he could recall all of his past life, 1 life, 2, 3, up to many hundreds of his past lives, the evolutions and the destructions of so many solar systems. He even remembered the details and summaries of many of his previous lives. The second knowledge was that with his clairvoyant and pure foresight, which surpasses the humans, he saw how the lives of living beings were lost and how they were then reincarnated, how the living beings were reborn according to their karma, being fortunate or unfortunate, being beautiful or unattractive, as well as being contemptible or noble. The third knowledge was that he had the knowledge to be able to certainly state, "This is suffering. This is the source of suffering. This is the end of suffering, and this is the way to the cessation of suffering. As such, by dawn, on the day of the full moon in the month of Asaka in 588 before Christ, at the age of 35, the ascetic Gautama finally achieved enlightenment and became the Buddha.
Nature shook softly to welcome the Buddha, or he who has awakened. That time, the whole of 10,000 solar systems reached the peak of aesthetic beauty. All sorts of trees were blossoming with flowers which were not supposed to bloom during that period. In the realms of heaven, the gods were delighted because the Buddha had found a way to liberate living beings from the samsara circle, or the perpetual circle of suffering. The gods then showered heavenly flowers and placed some flowers by the Buddha's side under the Bodhi tree.
The gods descended from the realms of heaven with their palms joined in front of their chests, also known as Anjali in Pali, gave respect to the Buddha by encircling him thrice. The Buddha expressed his happiness with 2 stanzas of a poem which depicted his moral victory and his spiritual experience. For countless incarnations I have gone through to search, but I do not find this house builder. How sad it is, perpetual rebirths. O house builder, now you are seen. You cannot build any more houses, and all your trestles are now broken. I have destroyed all of your main beams and bricks. The end of wanting has been achieved.
The Buddha spent the first 7 days after his enlightenment by sitting with his legs crossed under the Bodhi tree, while experiencing the joy of liberation. He pondered on the interdependent cause-effect laws, also known as Paticca Samuppada, with the first one being, if this is present, that is present too. With this occurrence, that takes place. And the second being, if this is absent, that is absent too. With the cessation of this, that ceases too.
On the 8th day, the Buddha walked a few steps in northeast direction. He then fixed his eyes on the Bodhi tree continuously without blinking for 7 days, to show his deepest gratitude towards the tree which had sheltered him during his struggle for attaining full enlightenment. 2 weeks have passed, and he was still around the Bodhi tree, causing some gods to have certain doubts. In order to clear their doubts, the Buddha created a trail composed of jewel stones in the air and spent his 3rd week there.
The Buddha headed to the foot of the Muchalinda tree, not far from where he was. It was pouring heavily and a storm came. And so, the magnanimous Naga king came out of his abode, gave respect to the Buddha, and sheltered the Buddha with his white hood. The Buddha then spent his 5th week at the foot of the Muchalinda tree.
After passing 5 weeks around the Bodhi tree, the Buddha headed to the foot of the banyan tree which was located east to the Bodhi tree. He sat as usual with his leg crossed at the foot of the tree and relished in his happiness of liberations for 7 days. A supercilious Brahmana approached the Buddha and asked him the criteria to be a Brahmana. The Buddha then answered, "He who has abandoned evil things, freed from haughtiness, stayed pure and controlled, quintessential in knowledge, and has undergone a holy life, he is worthy being called a Brahmana. For him there is no worldly pleasure anywhere."
During the 7th week, the Buddha spent his time at the foot of the Rajayatana tree, which was located south to the Bodhi tree. He sat with his legs crossed, and without any obstructions, he continued enjoying the joy of liberation.
On the first day in the 8th week of his enlightenment, the Buddha sat with his legs crossed under the Rajayana tree. Two merchants who were brothers happened to pass by. They, Tapusa and Balika, were taking the main path not far from the tree. They were forced to stop as one of the wheels of their carriage they were on sank into mud. Coincidentally, this incident was caused by a goddess who had been their mother in the previous life. The goddess felt that it was the appropriate time to give alms to the Buddha. Tapusa and Balika was mesmerized by the greatness of the Buddha and immediately donated their meals consisting of rice cake and honey. The Buddhas in the past had never received donations of food directly from him. The kings of gods from the four wind directions came, each carrying a granite bowl for the rice cake and honey.
The Buddha then exclaimed, "Let there be just one bowl," and at once, the four granite bowls became a single alms bowl. The Buddha received the alms using the new bowl, and he blessed the two merchants. These two merchants were the Buddha's first lay followers.
A thought arose in Buddha when he was considering preaching the Dhamma. The Dhamma which I have discovered is very deep, subtle, and challenging to be observed by those who are still living accepting the worldly desires and hatred. It is also very difficult to see through this truth, that is, the cessation of all forms, the detachment of all attachments, and the elimination of all greed, desires, and the direction of the path to Nibbana. They who rejoice in the worldly realm will never comprehend this profound Dhamma, because Dhamma doesn't flow alongside the river of worldly desires. In the Brahma realm, with his mind, Brahma Sampati could decipher what the Buddha was thinking, and he immediately thought, this universe will be lost and confused if Dhamma is not preached to living beings. Instantaneously, Brahma Sampati disappeared from the Brahma realm and appeared before the Buddha. After adjusting his robe and putting both of his palms in front of his chest to pay homage, Brahma Sampati requested Buddha to teach the world about Dhamma.
Brahma Sampati then requested to the Buddha, "Bhante," meaning teacher, "out of compassion, I hope Bhante is willing to preach the Dhamma to all living beings, humans, gods, and Brahmas alike. There are beings who have only little dust in their eyes, and they would be at a great loss if they do not hear the Dhamma. There would be beings who will comprehend the Dhamma you are going to preach." The Buddha observed the world through his Buddha eyes, also known as Buddha Chaku, and he saw clearly. There are beings who are able to comprehend the Dhamma without much effort, but some might need more effort and explanation, and there are also some who needs to be taught with much effort, and another some who will never understand the Dhamma. The door to Nibbana has been opened. I will preach the Dhamma to all living beings so that they have something to hold on to, and they can reap the benefits.
The Buddha then pondered further, whom should I teach this Dhamma for the first time? Who would easily comprehend this Dhamma? Buddha then thought of both of his first teachers, Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramabuddha, but with his spiritual side, he saw that they both had passed away. Then the Buddha thought about the 5 ascetics who accompanied him when practicing self-mortification in the Uruvela forest. The 5 ascetics were shown to be residing in the deer garden in Isipatana.
The Buddha lived in Uruvela and roamed to Benares as the first place of the Dhamma preaching. Although there are not many people staying in there, Benares was visited by countless numbers of holy people.
On his way to the Benares, located somewhere between the place where Buddha attained enlightenment and the Gaya forest, Buddha met a wandering hermit by the name of Ajivaka Upaka. Upaka was mesmerized by Buddha's serene appearance and asked, "Dear friend, I can see clearly that you are very holy. Your complexion is pure and shimmering. Under whose teachings did you abandon worldliness? Who is your teacher? Buddha then replied, There is no teacher for me, for I have surpassed everything and consequently, I know everything. I'm no longer attached to anything.
On his way to Benares, the Buddha was invited by the king of the Nagas to visit and rest in Mount Gaya. The Nagas served him and gave their respects to the Buddha.
While on his way passing the town of Horohita-Wastu, the Buddha was invited to a visit in the nearby palace and he then received the alms.
On his way to Benares, the Buddha was then again honored by the local rulers.
Besides much of the alms and honors given during his journey to Benares, the Buddha was also presented with many more outstanding gifts to which he declined.
The Buddha arrived at the banks of the Ganga river that was almost flooded. He then approached a boatman and asked for his help to cross the river to the opposite side. The boatman asked for the services fee, and since the Buddha had no money with him, he flew in the air to cross the Ganga river. The boatman passed out after feeling remorseful that he had missed a rare opportunity to serve such a noble being. After he regained consciousness, the boatman reported the incident to King Bimbisara, and since then, ascetics were freed of the service fee to cross rivers.
Buddha then arrived in the town of Benares. When morning came, the Buddha holding his alms bowl entered the town of Benares to receive alms. He received and consumed anything donated to him. After he finished eating, he proceeded with his journey to the deer garden in Isipatana in search for his 5 fellow ascetics.
The Buddha arrived in Benares, the deer garden. When the 5 ascetics saw the Buddha from the distance, they conspired to ignore him. Look, ascetic Gautama has come. He has stopped striving for enlightenment, pampered himself, and lived an easy and comfortable life once more. Let us not talk to him, nor respect him. We need not prepare a seat for him, and let him sit there if he wishes, and if he does not, just let him stand. However, when the Buddha approached them, they noticed that it was not the old ascetic Gautama they had known. His body was now glowing brilliantly, an unmatched greatness which made the 5 ascetics captivated that they could not keep their pact. Immediately, they came closer and served him, carried his bowl and outer robe, and prepared a seat for him.
The 5 ascetics then asked why the most disciplined self-mortification practice for 6 years did not yield any perfect enlightenment, but after he stopped striving, spoiled himself, and lived in an easy and comfortable life afterwards, he could attain full enlightenment. The Buddha then explained that he did not stop striving, and he also did not spoil himself, and live an easy and comfortable life. Rather, there are 2 extreme ways ought to be avoided by people who want to abandon the worldly life, which are self-indulgence and self-mortification.
The 5 ascetics soon realized that their belief had been wrong and acknowledged the Buddha as their teacher. They replaced their clothes with robes, they shaved their hair, and they held their bowls used to collect alms. As a symbol of dedication to the Buddha, they showered him in a pond teeming with lotus flowers.
The Dharma wheel was rotated for the first time on the day when a full moon in the month of Asalha occurred in 588 before Christ. That time, the Buddha preached his first discourse to the 5 ascetics. The discourse itself was named Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the sutta regarding the rotation of the Dharma wheel. The contents of the first discourse were about the 4 noble truths, Chattari Arya Sachani, and the 8-fold path or the middle way. which formed the basic mindset for all Buddhists to adopt. After understanding the Four Noble Truths, the 5 ascetics became enlightened. They then assisted the Buddha in disseminating the Dharma in a society comprising bhikkhus, Buddhist monks, which is known as the Sanghas, Buddhist monk brotherhood.